This show contains discussion of general investment strategies for information purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice. Diversification cannot eliminate the risk of investment losses. It's time for Your Money Puzzle Podcast, with good conversation and realistic solutions to the money puzzle problems we all face every day. Now let's get things started with our hosts. Here's Robert Edgen and Brian Johnson.
Hello and welcome to the Money Puzzle Podcast. I am Robert Edgen and I'll be your guide for the ride for the next few minutes. This is the place where we have candid conversations about money, finance, investing, and all of the other pieces of the money puzzle that you need to figure out so you can have the financial confidence you deserve and the
future that you dream of.
That's right. Brian Johnson, co-host, business partner, joining me from our respective, actually, I was going to say home offices, but Brian, you're in your real office.
I am in the real office. I'm tired of being at home.
Well, I get that. That's because you have 16 children. I have no kids at home. So I got to be honest, the COVID-19 was just kind of like it was like a staycation for my wife and I.
Oh, right. Well, it kind of felt that way. I'm glad to be back in the office.
So I am looking forward to it. We'll be back in the office next week, but for now, we are still hosting this from home, so it looks a little bit different. Hopefully the sound quality is okay, but still glad that we can get together, have some good conversations and some candid conversations about what's going on out there in the world of finance. So This is episode number 52, and today we are talking about when zero is your hero, the power of not losing money. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some strategies to minimize losses and some good things to think about when it comes to losing money. Am I right, Brian?
That's right.
So normally we go over some news, but I thought it would be fun instead today of talking about a news article if we both shared something new and exciting that we have done during our quarantine.
Excellent.
So I will go first because I am a very active person. Being locked up in the house goes so against everything that I love adventure. I love outdoors. This has been very hard. So what my wife and I have done is we took a jar I had originally got her a jar of 52 date ideas that I gave to her for Valentine's Day, which is also our wedding anniversary, by the way. And my wife repurposed it and made it 52 date ideas while you're quarantined. So, for example, this weekend we drew one. It was, go to the zoo, assign each other a spirit animal. Well, of course, you can't go to the zoo nowadays. So we ended up going to zoos all over the world. So same thing, we drew one about, going to museums. Well, we did virtual tours. We did one about, spending the weekend together, putting together a puzzle. But the bottom line is we've probably had about 24 different quarantine dates over the last month, just having a great time and getting to know each other, better and talking about things we haven't talked about. So that has been an amazing experience for my quarantine. What have you and your 16 children gotten into up in the mountains?
Well, with homeschooling, there's not a whole lot changes, right? Life just continues as is. But one of the things, and almost no one who listens to this would ever be doing this, but we went and bought some pigs.
You went and bought some pigs?
We bought some pigs, yeah. So they're now home in the backyard, and we're feeding them and watering them. And dude, pigs are great animals. So last weekend, it was a little warm. It wasn't hot, but for pigs, 50 degrees is hot. And so we're cleaning out their shelter, putting down new bedding and all that sort of stuff. And so I decided to dump a bucket of water on Bacon.
Your pig's name is Bacon?
One of them is, yeah. The other one, I'll tell you in a second. So okay. Bacon, the reason why we named him Bacon, because he's the biggest. Bacon so he thought that was great. And so we filled up we had to kick him out to let things dry out inside their shelter. And we had a big old bucket, small, like a bath bucket that a baby would go into, but it's probably 18 inches high. Well, he thought it'd be fun to act like a dog and put his head in it and then get up with his butt sticking up in the air and try rolling around inside this bucket. It was hilarious. And then he starts running around. I mean, pigs are amazing creatures. They really are. Ham is a smaller one, right? Because we love bacon more than we do ham. So the big one's bacon, the smaller one's ham. But he hates water. Hates it.
Yeah, we have very different lives, Brian. We talk every single day. I mean, we're both in Colorado, but I'm a city boy and you're a mountain man. But I do love the outdoors. I do love adventures, and you have pigs. This is the most. I've spent the last 6 weeks alone with my wife, and you really have 4 children, not 16, but you guys are out buying pigs named Bacon and Ham.
Yeah, dude, it was great. And yeah, fantastic. And we love it.
Well, that's a great quarantine experience.
But we got to tell you one more story about it. The funniest thing I've ever seen. So my 11-year-old, who is pretty much fearless over everything, we were trying to get Bacon into the trailer, and he decides to take off and just happened to run between Levi's legs, picked him up in the air. Levi's laying with his head to the back of the pig's butt, holding on as the pig is running down, the yard. So we're in the mountain, so everything's either down or up. Takes off running, and Levi was holding on for dear life, screaming as the pig was taking him for a ride. It was hilarious.
You have quarantine stories unlike anybody else I know.
Right.
Well, that is, we both learned some new stuff. We're both having fun and staying safe and healthy during the quarantine, which is good. And we are both looking forward to getting back to normal, which really should be here pretty darn quick. So good to know with that. Now, I'd say let's go ahead and get into today's hot topic of the day. All right, so let's get into today's hot topic of the day: when zero is your hero, the power of not losing money, which I know it just makes sense. Nobody wants to lose money, and instinctively everybody gets it. If you lose money, it hurts. It doesn't feel good. And Brian, I'm guessing you've never had a client call you and ask you, can you please lose some money for me?
No, yeah, right.
No. So it doesn't feel good, but most people don't realize just how much losses hurt, either when we are in the savings phase, because that will slow down when you can retire, or especially after you retire, because losing money then could jeopardize your retirement in general. Right? So everyone says, I want to make as much money as I can in my investments, but they don't look at that flip side of I want to avoid losing as much as I can in my investments as well. But equally important, would you say, Brian?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that people don't realize is how much risk they're willing to take. Is great when the market is running north, but when it starts to come back down, how painful is it when we'll just using a crazy example, your $100,000 becomes $80,000, and but yet originally you were taking all this risk because of the hopes, making all kinds of money, but it doesn't feel nearly as good when it starts dropping back off.
It does not. And I know you come across this a lot, but when I'm talking with a client and we talk about risk and we talk about loss, they always think that they are more aggressive or willing to take more risk than they actually are, because as soon as markets start to change and things start to decline, well, then they start to feel it. And it's a lot different when you feel a loss than when you just theorize about I'm willing to lose. But in general, it really hurts or slows down the growth of your portfolios. And if we look at a market downturn, or a couple of different kinds, let's look at a correction.
Right.
In a bear market. A correction is anytime a market goes down 10% or more, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And a bear market is every time it goes down 20% or more, which is what we're in right now.
Yeah, so I mean, I just pulled up some statistics on it. So a correction, we're at that 10% or more type of downturn. How often? I'll ask you, Rob. How often in the history has it happened? You remember?
A downturn?
A correction,
Oh, a correction. A
10% or
correction.
more.
Yeah, a correction happens every single year almost.
Yeah, it's happened 95 times. I mean, just think about that since the Great Depression, 95 times.
Yeah, that's almost every single year. In
Yep,
fact,
it is.
95 times in about 90 years is actually more
Yeah.
than every single year.
Yeah, no. So then now, let's take a look at a bear market. How many times has a bear market happened?
And a bear market is every time we lose 20% or more, right?
That's right.
And now I know the answer, so it's cheating, but I believe it's somewhere around half of that. It's about 50 times.
No, it's 25.
So, I was only kind of
25
cheating.
times.
I should have cheated
Right.
more.
So it's been 25 times. But the other interesting thing that we always have to think about is that markets have never not recovered, right? Every single time there's a correction, every single time that there's been a bear market, it's always recovered. Now, but what's the duration? So when we look at a correction, it usually recovers in 4 months.
So this is after, so we've got two different things. We've got how long a correction lasts, and then we have how long it takes for the money to get back to where it was pre-correction, right?
Yeah, that's
So
right. So on average for a market correction is 4 months. Not bad.
4 months to get back to even. That's no big deal at all.
Yeah, no big deal at all. But and that creates opportunity, of course. We've talked about that before. Now talk about the bear market. What's an average time frame? Take a guess for a bear market to recover.
It's close to 2 years.
It is 22 months. Yeah, just about 2 years is what it takes for a 20% plus reduction in order to get back to where it once was. It's still not bad, but like you said before, if you're getting close to retirement, that is extremely painful.
Yeah, and if you did have, let's say, $80,000 in the account, and $100,000 in your account, and went back down to that 80,000. Well, first off, you've got how long does the bear market last? And on average, those last about a year, right? I think 13 and a half months is what
Bear market 22 months
to recover, but they last 13 months.
Oh yeah, 13. That's correct. Yep.
So a bear market, you're in it for 13 months. So it doesn't feel good for 13 months because you might be losing money, while it's going down for 13 months. Then you have another 22 months of recovery. So the good news is there's never been a correction that has not recovered in the history of the stock market.
That's right.
But on the flip side of that, if you had 13 months of being in the bear market and then another 22 months to recover, then you basically have 3 years where your money started here and ended here. So if the closer you get to retirement, or really in general, if you've got 3 years just to step backwards and step forwards, then it definitely does slow things down. What's your number one rule to investing, Warren Buffett? Rule number one is don't lose money. And what's Warren Buffett's second rule of investing? See rule number one. But I'd like to examine that a little bit because we know that Warren Buffett has had losses in his investments. In fact, you have one that we were just discussing not that long ago.
Yeah.
So, how about Warren Buffett's, big investment or his last big loss? Talk to us about that.
Well, I mean, it was accidental petroleum. I remember reading it in the news. Okay. I mean, that's all we read, right? We read a lot. So I was reading it in the news. And I think the share price was like $40 a share. And so I started saying, let's see what Warren does with this, right? He just bought accidental petroleum. What happened? It went down to, I think, the low of 9. I don't know what it is today. I have no idea what it is today. I don't know. I don't follow it, whatever. But so did he take a loss? Yes, on paper he did.
On paper.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, he says never lose money. And of course, we never want to invest in something that we think is going to go down, but sometimes your investments do go down, but it's a paper loss. It's not an actual loss. So yeah, one of the things that I think Warren Buffett means as far as never lose money, a part of that is don't sell out at the wrong time,
Right.
right? Don't sell out at a loss.
Right. Or sell out, when you invest in something, you don't necessarily want to only hold it for 6 months or 5 months. We're not day traders, right? We don't want to short-term hold things. We want to look for good quality companies that have the potential based on financials and different things of running and lasting the long term. So we hold on to those assets.
So that's Warren's whole philosophy for purchasing. It's buy and hold. So
Yeah.
sometimes when you buy, things do go down. Now, if that is the case, we'll talk about some strategies here in a minute to actually take advantage of some of those things. But ultimately, Warren says don't lose money. Of course, nobody wants to lose money. But if your account goes temporarily down, knowing that you're in a bear market and it takes 22 months to recover after 13 months of being in it, those are the averages, then if you just hold on to it for 3 years, then in theory, it should at least be back to even.
Yeah, right. History shows us that. So let's move on to this one thing. This is interesting. How long does it take to recover? Or not? What percentage do you need? So if you had that $100,000 example and you lost 20%, which takes you down to 80, what percent do you need in order to get back to even? I mean, that's one of those things that people think of. They're like, oh, if I made 20%, I'll be back to even, but you're not.
That's right.
Right.
And
so if you lose
hear it all
20,
the time. Yep, I lost 20, I gained back 20, I'm back to even. But what is it in reality?
Yeah, you really need 25% to gain back that 20% in loss. I mean, it's just simple math, right?
So if you had 100,000, you lost 20%, you're down to 80,000, right?
Yeah.
Now you gained back the 20%, but the 20% is on 80,000, which would be 16,000. So that puts you back to 96 and not 100.
Yep. That's right.
That's why you need 25% to recover. That makes sense.
Yeah. So now let's say you're a retiree. Rob, you're now 72 years old.
Okay.
Because that's our new RMD age.
Yeah.
So you're 72 years old. No, let's say that you retired on February 1st of 2020.
Before the last correction started.
Yep. And you call me up and say, I want 4% of my portfolio pulled out every single year. You send it to me, and that's what I'm going to live on.
So on that $100,000, I'm going to take 4%, which they say is a safe withdrawal amount every year to make it less. So I'm going to take $4,000 a year out of that 100,000.
Right.
Okay.
Now we go into the correction. Okay. So we're just going to use 30% because it's simple. Okay. It goes down 30% and you pulled out 4%. How much return is needed in order to make back to where you were?
Well, I know it's not 30% because we already discussed if it was 20 going down, it's not 20 going up. So if it's 30 going down, it can't be 30 going up. So how much is it?
63%.
63%. Now, what if I'm not taking withdrawals? Then, how much of a difference does that make?
Well, you need basically 43% in order to get back if you're not taking withdrawals. If you're taking the withdrawal, it's going to take 63.
So,
isn't that amazing?
It is amazing and scary. And the reason because now, let's say you had 100,000, now you took out $4,000, now you have 96,000. Now you lose 30% of the 96,000, but then you still take out another $4,000 this next year. Well, now you have less money to use to recover. So even if you make the same 42% or 43%, that you needed to make when you weren't taking withdrawals, it's on less money, so it does not get back to where it was.
Yeah, absolutely. It's rough, and that's why we always recommend talk to an advisor to help work through these things, because there's some strategies that you can use going into retirement or right in retirement that can limit that scariness.
Yeah, the closer you get to retirement, the more important this conversation becomes. Of course, it's important when you're 30 years old, because if you go back a few steps, right, then you have to get back to even before you can go ahead. But we'll talk about a strategy for that in a second. But if you are 63 years old and recovering at age 6 or retiring at age 67, it's a whole different story. In fact, that puts you into what Prudential made famously known as the retirement red zone, which is the 5 years before you retire and the 5 years after you retire. And they had a great study. You can Google it. Just Google retirement red zone. It'll show right up. But they did a great study that shows if you lose money in the 5 years before you retire or the 5 years after you retire, that is the most detrimental time to lose money of all of your investing life. And the reason is because the 5 years before, you don't have time to recover before you start taking money out. And that 5 years after, when you're taking those distributions, well, now you're compounding the problem if you have to recover, right? If you lose money, let's say when you're 85 years old, it doesn't hurt quite as bad. It still doesn't feel good, but it doesn't hurt your prospects of having the money last as long because you're already 85 years old.
That's just when you tell the kids, hey, guys, I just spent your retirement. Sorry. Or you can be like you, and you're a workaholic. So working at 85 years old is no big deal.
It might happen.
Yeah.
But that is what makes you have to go back to work.
Yeah.
If you lose money, let's say you lose 50%, right after you retire, and you're taking 4% withdrawals. Now, we know the math. You have to earn back 321% to get back to even, right? So really what's the bigger likelihood? You can't stay retired. You might have to go back to work, right? It jeopardizes your retirement. So you really want to be careful in that retirement red zone, even more so, as you compare to when you're in your 30s.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure.
So now, Brian, I know that investors have averaged far different returns than what the stock markets have averaged over the last 3 and 10 and 20 and 30 years.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about that. What's the S&P 500 done versus what individual investors have done over different time frames?
Right. So look at the S&P 500. The last 3 years, except for the last 2 months, but the last 3 years, almost 9% is what the S&P 500 is average. Fantastic return. I mean, all you had to do, if you could handle the emotion, is buy it and hold on to it. Not bad. But because of emotions, the average investor only did 3.42%.
So 5.5% less than just investing and leaving it alone over the last 3 years. So how about 10 years?
Let's see, the S&P 500, 6.95%, basically 7%.
Versus individual investors?
3.64. I mean, barely more than the 3-year average. Barely.
Yeah, over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
So this is a problem. Is if the markets are going up 9% or 7%, or over the 30-year average, it's 10% is the average. But what's the average individual investor's return over 30 years? 4%.
That's it.
So if you're not keeping up with the markets, fine. Maybe that's because you're adjusted for risk, but that's really not what's going on here. We have some behavioral reasons that are causing investors to not keep up. Or really what's going on is they're losing money and having to recover, losing money and then having to recover. So what are they getting? A 3.5% average return basically every year. Right. And it is hard to get a good bucket of money set aside unless you're investing a significant amount when you're only averaging 3.5% per year.
That's right. Yeah.
So we know that most of that comes down to behavioral reasons or behavioral finance, which we've talked about the herd mentality before. We've talked about confirmation bias and familiarity bias, but basically what it comes down to is individuals making bad decisions based on emotion.
That's right. Yeah.
So, and that causes them to take losses that they might not otherwise have taken.
Well, and that's where you and I come into play, and other financial advisors, because we plan for the long term, not these real short periods of time, even though there's some planning that comes into play in those short periods of time. But sticking to your goals will help alleviate the behavioral or the emotional side of the investing. Being focused, to stay focused on those goals, and everything will be okay over the long term, especially if you have 5 years ago, 6 years ago, whatever the case may be. But also within that becomes an opportunity, right? I mean, we've had a lot of clients calls and say, hey, can I put more money in the market now?
Yeah.
Isn't that
So
perfect?
yeah, so strategies to use, first off, working with an advisor, and we know we talked about this on the show. We did a whole podcast about it. Vanguard did that great study that shows that
Mhm.
working with an advisor is worth about 3% a year to your portfolio returns, because a big part of it is they help with this emotion, they help with the behavior. They help you avoid making bad decisions of selling at the wrong time or buying at the wrong time.
Yeah.
But another strategy is, especially if you are younger, that if your account went down by 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, what should you be doing? It's an opportunity to put more money in while it is coming back up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's a fantastic opportunity.
It's a fantastic opportunity. So that is and should be one of your strategies to use if you are a younger investor and you've got, let's say, more than 5 years to go before you retire. Then you see the losses. They're not
Yep.
realized unless you sell out, but use that as an opportunity to put as much money in as you can to capture more of those gains going back.
Yeah, absolutely. It just makes sense.
Yeah. Let's talk about some other strategies. This is another good reason. We've talked about this in the past, that you should rebalance your account, every 6 months or every 12 months. What does rebalance mean? Well, what happens over the course of 6 months or 12 months is that if you invested some of your money in aggressive growth things and some of your money in safe fixed income things, well, the growth things should perform better and it should get out of balance. Well, then if you have a loss, and let's say you have a 40% loss, well, that's going to affect the more aggressive things more. So you're going to experience a larger loss. So every 6 months or 12 months, you should rebalance. That means you should take and sell off some of those aggressive or more growth-oriented investments and put them into the safer investments so you have the appropriate amount in each. And that amount is something that you figure out with your advisor. How about other strategies?
So one of our favorites, both of ours, I would think, right, is using the bucket strategy. We've talked about this before too, but what we do for our retirees, especially, is one of the buckets is cash. We like to have at least a year in cash that we can easily access. So when there is a correction or there is a bear market, we're not going to have to change how much somebody is going to be living on for that particular year.
And you don't have to sell out some of the growth stuff. So yeah, we talk, the bucket strategy basically looks at time, and we say, all right, some of your investments really aren't going to be accessed for a decade.
Yep.
They're meant for covering inflation, for covering growth, we still have to keep our money lasting, but we're not going to touch that money for a decade. Even if you're retired, some of your money you won't touch for 10 years. Some of it you won't touch for 5 years. So having money set aside and available to use without having to sell off assets at a loss, that is a great way to avoid those losses. You just take cash when your other assets have lost, wait for them to recover.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep,
So,
for sure. I mean, we have one client, and they're older. I mean, when I mean older, they're both in their 80s. And one of the things that they talked to us about last year, and when we met with them in the fourth quarter, was, why are we holding so much cash? You remember that conversation?
I do.
And when this all happened, we ended up talking. We contact our clients on a regular basis. She says, I am so thankful that you had so much money in cash.
That's right. All of a sudden, you seem smart, Brian.
Yeah, I know. Even though
you got smart overnight. So
right.
Yeah, So having the bucket strategy, that's another strategy to avoid loss. Also adjusting your portfolio as you get older. There's a rule. It's called the rule of 100, and it's not set in stone that this is what you should follow, but it's an example of how you should structure your portfolio. Basically, it is 100 minus your age. So if you are 60, then that would be 40. Then that is the amount of money that you should have for growth. And your age amount is the amount that you should have protected from risk. Now, that doesn't mean that it's never going to go down, but it just means that it's invested with the idea of being safer and less risky. So it helps you diversify, which is another great strategy that you're going to share with us. But you need to adjust as you get older. You can't have all of your money invested the same way at age 60 that you did at age 30, right? So
That's
adjust
right.
it first, risk as you get older, and then make sure it's diversified, right, Brian?
That's right. Absolutely. So diversification, I mean, what everybody thinks about, or we should think about, is the typical 60-40 portfolio, right? That means you have 40% of your money in safer assets. I don't know, real estate or bonds as a great example. Everybody thinks of safe asset, they think of bonds. That's typical 60-40 type of portfolio, because what that does, what we saw this with a lot of our accounts that we have, when the market was down 34%, I think that was its bottom, right?
39.
Some of our biggest ones were only 13-14% down.
That's right.
Really not that bad. I mean, our clients were looking at more of a correction than they were of a bear market, because we were holding safer assets to offset that risk.
Yeah, and that's a great way of explaining it. And that's the power of diversification. I loved it. You said it right. While the economy was in a bear market, because of diversification, most of our clients were in a correction. So same economic environment, but because they were well diversified, you don't experience the same amount of loss.
That's right.
Diversification.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, and then we talked about don't sell out at a loss, right? Because you don't actually realize it unless you sell out. It's on paper, right? And we talked about working with an advisor, but again, a great strategy is just to have someone to spot check your work, to have the conversations with, to keep you from, falling off that ledge.
Yeah.
To help you make good decisions. So strategies: be diversified, rebalance, keep investing. In fact, if you can, invest more when things are down, because it's going to recover and it's going to be awesome. Adjust your portfolio based on your age. Use the bucket strategy. Don't sell out at a loss. If we miss anything.
No, I don't think so. That's a pretty good comprehensive explanation.
Yeah. So if you need some help, if you've got questions about your own money puzzle, feel free to email us questions@yourmoneypuzzle.com. If you need to, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. Give us a rating on YouTube or in the podcast app that you're listening to. Give us some thumbs up. That's right. And until next week, be safe, stay healthy, have a little bit of fun, and go out there and do something to improve your money puzzle. Your future self will thank you for it.
Registered representative of and securities offered through Securities Management and Research, Inc., SM&R. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through BFC Planning, Inc. Edgen Insurance and Financial Services, Johnson Financial Services, SM&R, American National Family of Companies, and BFC Planning are independent entities. There are risks involved with investing, which may include market fluctuation and possible loss of principal value. Particular investments may not be suitable for certain situations. Carefully consider the risks and possible consequences involved prior to making an investment decision. Our firm does not provide legal or tax advice